Frank Garza sat alone at his desk, staring at the stack of papers in front of him. The office was empty except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional tap of a computer key from a neighboring cubicle. Frank was a man who had always been driven by his work, and now that he had nothing to distract him, he found himself consumed by his thoughts. He stared blankly at the numbers on the page, trying to focus on the task at hand, but his mind kept drifting back to memories of his relationship with his ex-girlfriend. The flashback begins. Frank remembers the first time he met his ex-girlfriend at a coffee shop. They had hit it off right away, talking for hours about their dreams and aspirations. The scene shows a cozy coffee shop, with the sound of steam from the espresso machine and soft jazz music playing in the background. Frank and his ex-girlfriend sit across from each other, their eyes locked in conversation. But now, as he thought back on those early days, he couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. He had been so in love with her, and now it was all gone. The scene shifts back to the office, with Frank sighing and pushing the papers away in frustration. He knew that there was no going back now, that their relationship was irreparably broken. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing in his life. He had always been a man who knew what he wanted and how to get it, but now he found himself lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Meanwhile, across town, Eugenia Lynn was getting ready for a night out on the town. The scene shows Eugenia's luxurious apartment, with plush velvet furniture and modern art on the walls. Eugenia herself is shown standing in front of a full-length mirror, surveying herself critically. She adjusts her tight dress and runs a hand through her long hair, making sure every detail is perfect. She had just heard the news about Frank's breakup, and she knew that this was her chance to make a move. Eugenia was a woman who always got what she wanted, no matter the cost. She had her sights set on Frank's money, and she was willing to do whatever it took to get it. At the bar, Frank and Eugenia sat across from each other, sipping cocktails and making small talk. The scene shows a trendy bar, with dim lighting and a lively atmosphere. The noise of conversation and laughter fills the air. Frank and Eugenia are shown sitting at the bar, their drinks in front of them, engaged in a playful banter. Frank couldn't help but notice the way Eugenia kept glancing at his wallet, and he began to feel uneasy. But despite his misgivings, he found himself drawn to her. She was beautiful and confident, and he couldn't help but be intrigued by her. But just as Frank was starting to let his guard down, Eugenia spoke again. "You know, I'm really glad we're doing this. I've been wanting to get to know you better." Frank couldn't help but feel a little skeptical. He had only met Eugenia a few weeks ago, and already she was throwing herself at him. He wondered if she was really interested in him, or just interested in his money. Scene 2. Frank and Eugenia at a restaurant. As they reached the restaurant, Frank looked around at the decor. It was an upscale Italian restaurant, with dim lighting and elegant table settings. Frank was impressed, but he couldn't help but feel a little out of place. He was used to more casual dining experiences, and he wasn't sure if he could live up to Eugenia's expectations. They were seated at a small table in the corner of the restaurant. The waiter appeared almost immediately, offering them menus and taking their drink orders. Frank ordered a glass of red wine, while Eugenia opted for a sparkling water. As they perused the menu, Frank found himself struggling to make a decision. He wasn't familiar with many of the items on the menu, and he didn't want to embarrass himself by ordering the wrong thing. Eugenia seemed to sense his hesitation and offered to help him decide. "You should try the lobster ravioli," she said. "It's my favorite dish here." Frank was a little surprised by her suggestion. Lobster ravioli didn't sound like something he would normally order, but he decided to take a chance. When the food arrived, Frank was pleasantly surprised. The lobster ravioli was rich and creamy, with just the right amount of seasoning. He found himself enjoying the meal, and the conversation flowed easily between them. As they finished their meal, Frank felt a sense of relief. Maybe he had misjudged Eugenia after all. She seemed genuinely interested in him, and they had a great evening together. But just as they were about to leave, Eugenia made an unexpected request. "Frank, would you mind giving me a ride home?" she asked. "My car is in the shop, and I don't want to take a taxi." Frank hesitated for a moment, but eventually agreed. As they left the restaurant and walked to his car, Frank felt a strange sense of unease. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something about Eugenia's request didn't feel right. As they drove through the city streets, Eugenia chattered on about her job and her family, but Frank found his mind wandering. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this whole situation. Maybe it was the way Eugenia seemed to be pushing for a relationship so quickly, or maybe it was something else entirely. When they finally arrived at Eugenia's apartment, Frank pulled up to the curb and put the car in park. Eugenia turned to him, a coy smile on her face. "Thank you so much for tonight, Frank," she said. "I had a really great time." Frank smiled back, but his mind was already elsewhere. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he was missing, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. As Eugenia got out of the car and walked up the steps to her apartment building, Frank sat in his car, deep in thought. What was Eugenia's game? And why did she seem so interested in him all of a sudden? Frank knew he needed to be careful. He couldn't let himself get too close to her, not until he knew for sure what her intentions were. With that thought in mind, Frank drove home, determined to keep his guard up around. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for the next episode.